watching you.
To start with, I'm a white female. I was adopted 7 years ago by a Navajo family, and we've always been close despite obvious cultural differences. Still, I learned about skinwalkers firsthand, and they've since become an accepted part of my life. I have a ton of skinwalker stories, but I will start off with just a few. The first happened to my adopted uncle. He lives in Blanding, Utah, a spot not quite notorious for skinwalkers, but full of them nonetheless. He was driving through the canyon area at night and got that familiar feeling. It was dark outside, but the moon illuminated the canyon and the brush, enough for him to see out of his side vision that something was running across the desert night. He was in his 40s at the time and a police officer, so a full-grown man. He started singing in Navajo and kept his eyes on the road in front of him. But he was driving at least 55 to 60 miles per hour, so the shape running through the desert was keeping pace with him despite his high speed. He said that it looked vaguely human-shaped, but paler than any human he'd ever seen. Still, he didn't look directly at it, and despite his singing, he was getting more and more scared. I think my Navajo family always taught me was that these creatures feed on your fear. This one certainly seemed to. My uncle was shaking and sweating when the running thing picked up speed, outpacing his truck. And then, when it was maybe 30 yards ahead of him, it made a sharp right and began to run toward the road. He knew it was going to directly intersect him, and he made up his mind to put his foot on the gas, because being broken down out in the middle of the road in the dark alone was a death sentence. So it got closer. He sped up, and just as the two crossed paths, it jumped onto the road. So he saw it for the first time then. He described it as a skinny man in jeans and a plaid shirt, with a long face and big yellow eyes that looked like cat eyes. Its arms were thrown up over its head, and its hands were kind of flying out behind it. The worst part was that its mouth was open and seemed to be disconnected from its jaw. Its chin was just flapping around, about a foot below its nose. It leapt onto the road and then just as quickly jumped out of the way of his truck. He didn't see it again. He prayed the whole way home, and they had a ceremony shortly after that. Another encounter happened to my adopted brother, who was one of the most level-headed and unshakable men I've ever met. He was 30 when this happened. He was at his dad's house, partaking in one of their ceremonies, which happens in a hogan. The rule is that you never leave the hogan alone, because the magic and the energy that you make during these ceremonies is kind of like a supernatural light beacon, and you never know what kind of creatures you're attracting. Still, Eric, my brother, was a pretty rational guy and wasn't afraid of the dark. He'd been in the hogan for hours, chanting and praying, and he needed a smoke break and to take a leak. So against the general rule, he edged out of the roundhouse and out into the night. There was nothing around except 15 or 20 parked cars, all close to the ceremony area. It was a large gathering. So Eric did his business with no incident and lit up a cigarette. He was standing there, staring off into space, when he got that feeling of being watched. To shake it off, he walked away from the hogan, about 20 feet, and scanned the desert. Everything was quiet, except the drums coming from the tent and the singing within. Just as he was about to shrug off his weird feeling and chuck his cigarette butt, he saw it. Under one of the vehicles, a dark shape and two shining eyes. The eyes were like animal eyes. They didn't glow on their own, but they had reflective light in them, and they glinted right at Eric. They were yellow. The creature didn't have the shape of any animal he recognized though. He explained it to me that it was shaped like Gollum, really skinny with a round human head. Eric, not scared of something that would make me shit my pants instantly, walked toward the vehicle and bent down to get a closer look. Dust scrabbled around, and he could hear a skittering noise. One bony arm shoved some gravel his way, and the next thing he knew, the creature was gone and the vehicle was empty. But then he smelled this disgusting, puke-worthy stench, and he got scared then, because that's one of the worst things in the Navajo culture. Bad smells are treated very seriously when they're assumed to be supernatural. So he straightened back up, and then he realized the source of the smell. A shadow fell over him, covering him from behind, and he is around 6'2", so this thing he said he estimated at 7.5 feet at least. He was shivering and didn't move as it approached him from behind, until it was standing inches away. He could feel it, smell it, see its shadow, and the worst thing, he felt it breathe on his neck. Eric said that it sounded like a horse or a cow when it snorts, and its breath was warm. When he looked at his feet, he saw his own shoes, and behind his right foot, a big hoof. So he closed his eyes and started to sing. And right at that moment, his dad and uncle got a terrible feeling from inside the Hogan. They bolted up and exited, calling his name. They found him shivering outside, too terrified to talk and too terrified to stop singing in Navajo. It took Eric months before he shared this with us, and he did so expecting us to laugh or call him crazy. But I completely believe his story.
This happened to my older brother, who we can call David again. It was back in the early 2000s, and he was a senior in high school in a small Podunk, Utah town. Being a senior and a football player, he was kind of an asshole and did stupid things, one of which included walking through the woods late at night to, as he called it, throw rocks and terrorize kids from school. Yes, immature, I know. But he and his accomplice, another Navajo called Sean, were seniors and tackles on the football team. They walked through the woods because cops patrolled the streets and there was a city curfew in place. The route they took went through a state park, which has lots of Navajo artifacts and even a kiva, which you can go down into. So one night, they were sneaking through the forest before the sun had risen, and they had begun to stop and shush each other because they could sometimes hear footsteps in the distance. Unless some other football geniuses had the idea to walk through the desert, there should have been no one else out there. This continued for a while until Sean stopped David, grabbed him, and said, "Get down." They dropped to their stomachs and hid, listening. Now the footsteps crunching through the dry desert foliage were accompanied by mumbling. David estimated that the sounds were maybe 100 feet away at first, but got closer. He doesn't know if the mutterings were Navajo or English or some other language. After a while of the noises staying fairly far away, Sean whispered without looking, "It sounds like a drunk." Several more minutes and David decided to chance a peek as the drunk sounded more distant now. It was night, but the moon was bright and the light bounced off the canyon wall nearby. David was looking for a man, but instead he saw a figure which he said moved with a tilt to its body and was long and tall. It was human formed and walking on 2 feet, but misshapen and very tall. He said it maybe resembled a kokopelli or Navajo Kachina doll, so not exactly normal shaped. It mumbled and drifted through the trees, seemingly looking for something. He was pretty captivated watching it for a few minutes, and then suddenly the snapping twigs and the mutterings just stopped. Everything was quiet, and the figure, whatever it was, had just disappeared. After that, David and Sean both felt that whatever was in the forest at the time was gone. They sat on the ground afterward discussing what had just happened. Sean asked about what David had seen, and then stated, "I didn't look, because if I would have, it would have known we were both staring." I forgot to ask him if he and Sean went back through the woods, but the answer is probably yes. This kind of happening is pretty common within the Navajo culture, and it's something they're used to dealing with. Personally, I would have shit myself, but that's another story for another day.
So I live in San Juan County, on the Utah side. I was with some friends and we wanted to party, and my friend said her boyfriend had alcohol, so we went to his house. We ended up in this place on the res, in the middle of nowhere by a shack, and found him and his dog asleep in a ditch. The first thing I notice is that there are bones everywhere. Next, the dog got up, but it got up really creepily. I've never been afraid of any dog ever, but the way this one got up gave me the chills. It was super skinny and looked like it had mange because its fur was patchy and its skin looked leathery. Its eyes looked human, and it kept balancing on its back legs while crouched over. The whites of its eyes were also red, while the irises were light brown. Next, the guy got up. He was really sketchy. At first, we just thought he was just drunk, but he was acting incredibly strange. As soon as he got in the car, it reeked like actual death. Like, he smelled rotten and foul. We had to roll the windows down. He was wearing baggy clothing and 4 different jackets. We'll call him B. He was talking incoherently and kept yawning while he talked, but he seemed to walk mostly normal, except he had a weird limp that made him sway with every step. Turned out he didn't have any drinks, but we had already gotten to him, so we went to get another friend that we knew. So we pick up this friend, we'll call him A. A has alcohol, but we have nowhere to party, so B says he knows a spot. We proceed to let B guide us back to the reservation and to a really sketchy trailer a few miles away from where we initially picked him up. The dog is there waiting for us. At this point, I just wanted to go home because the whole scenario was just giving me awful vibes, and everything in my body was telling me I needed to leave. I'm not a superstitious person at all either, but B's girlfriend was my ride home, so I had no other choice. I decided at that moment that I wasn't going to drink or do drugs with them because of the circumstances. We get out of the car and the creepy ass dog comes straight to me and knocks me down and starts trying to dry hump me. B got the dog off me immediately though, and I ran into the abandoned trailer. Some of the windows were broken and everything was old and dusty. The carpet was torn up and there was no furniture except for some lawn chairs. I took a seat. I hear B whisper to A that he has some spice. My 3 other friends then get into the trailer with me and start taking shots of alcohol that A brought. B whips out a bowl to smoke something. My friends ask what it is, and he says it's weed. They start smoking and it doesn't smell like weed at all. I look at it under the flashlight and realize it is indeed spice, and try telling them that it's not weed, and that we should probably leave. They make fun of me and take more shots and more hits. I look out the window and see the creepy ass dog crawling or running around the trailer. A at this point is pretty drunk and starts yelling at B for killing his dad a few days prior. B gets flustered and leaves with his girlfriend. A few minutes later, the dog tries to open the door with its paws. It doesn't succeed, but I could see it trying to since the door had a window. I got really scared because this dog was not normal and was just staring at me through the glass. I start sharing my location with a few people in case something wrong happens. A is crying about how B murdered his dad on the res and that he can't bring himself to forgive B for what he's done. They're apparently close cousins. I just wanted to go home. B returns with his girlfriend and a fight breaks out, so we all leave B and his dog at the trailer. Then B's girlfriend randomly has a psychotic episode as we get back to town and decides she wants everyone else in the car to walk home. She screams at them to get out, and they all walk over a mile to get to their homes. She drops me off for some reason, without saying a word. When I get home, I check my phone to find that my friends were scared because something kept throwing rocks at them on their way back. Anyways, I'm literally convinced that this was an experience with a Yanni or skinwalker or something. Everyone there was a Navajo except me, if that makes any difference. I know it's cheesy in writing, but it was actually really scary and I was crying on the way back home. I don't know how to describe how the dog walked, but it was not normal. Anyways, I might just be paranoid, but everything about this situation was honestly just so scary and weird that I felt like I needed to share it with someone and see what their thoughts were. I've been terrified and haven't been able to sleep because even if it wasn't a skinwalker, it was a murderer who probably hadn't showered since the murder, that had a creepy ass dog that tried to drug us.
I live near a very large, very popular national park. Locals here, like myself, are pretty aware of the goings-on near here. Strange sounds, strange creatures, and strange disappearances. I have dealt with these myself in the past on hikes, and even just relaxing in the park. Here is one that still freaks me out till this day. I was at my grandma's house that's deep in the boonies. The only road to there is a gravel road that is pretty much washed away, so without a good car, you're not getting out of there anyways. My cousins lived in a trailer with their mom, right below my grandma's. We played all sorts of games, which mainly involved me getting chased. I was the youngest. My grandma was in the hospital with my aunt, so our older cousin, who I'll name D, had to watch us. D was, and still is, the only cousin that's older than us that we still hold in high regards. He would mess with us and play around, but actually cared about us. The whole day we spent playing around, but we would usually play more at night, like hide and seek, tag, etc. We had been playing pretty far away from the house, and it was starting to get dark. We decided to go back to the house and grab flashlights and play manhunt. Of course, I was the one being hunted. I ran pretty far into the woods on the other side of the property and hid behind a log. I heard my cousins getting close, so I ran and they saw me. We ended up running to the very back of the property line, almost a mile from the house, and we saw my cousin D. He looked at us and kind of growled, and we all ran from him thinking it was a game. We ran back onto the gravel road, and we saw him walk out of the tree line, but he did weird kind of gloating in a way. We ran into the house and decided to barricade the door to play a prank on him. We moved a couple of things in front of the door, but decided to move the big coffee table in front of it too. As we loudly scooted the table across the floor, D came into the living room from the master bedroom, running his eyes. We had obviously woke him up from all the movement, and he was mad. We told him about seeing him chase us, and he got wide-eyed. He told us to go to our bedroom and stay there. We sat in the bedroom for about 20 minutes, and he came in and told us not to worry, that it was just him scaring us, and we went on with the night. It wasn't until about 3 years later, when I was 13, that he told me the truth. It was a skinwalker. He told me that he has dealt with it when he was our age, and he told me his story.
This happened around the mid-90s. D, much like me and my cousins, spent his childhood around my grandma's property with his brother, C, and his cousin, K. They would play manhunt and tag and such like we did. When this story took place, it was in the middle of the summer, and he was around 12. He, C, and K were playing in a treehouse that is no longer standing. They had just pulled a prank on K and were hiding from him in the treehouse. D and C stayed in the treehouse until K stopped looking. C left and went back to our grandma's house and left D alone. D stayed up in the treehouse and read some comics. The treehouse was about half a mile from the house and was on a hill, so that you could still see the house from it. But it was still in the woods. At the time, my grandpa was still alive, but was in Georgia on a retreat, so he was not there, which let the three boys do whatever they wanted. Grandpa would holler for them to come in when it started to get dark, because there was, and still is, a large number of coyotes and bears around the house. D decided to read comics all day, something he still enjoys, and eventually fell asleep. He woke up and it was dusk. He heard our grandma yelling for him, and he began to get ready to leave. As he went down the ladder, he heard a coyote yip, and he climbed back up. He began to explain what the coyote looked like, and I realized it was the same one that me and my cousins had seen growing up as well. It looked like it had mange. It had a large tuft of fur missing on its right side, and you could see the bare pale skin, and it had human-like eyes. It snarled at him and bore its teeth. He was taken aback by this, and he just sat back down in the treehouse. The coyote sat at the base of the ladder and just looked up at him. He told me he sat there for about 20 minutes, trying to figure out what to do. He remembered that he had a slingshot and decided that the best course of action would be to try and scare it off with that. He said he shot at it, and it just growled more. My cousin was, and still is, a very good shot with a slingshot. I had a couple of bruises to prove it. He reared back and decided to aim at its eyes, because he didn't like the way it stared at him. He reared back and got it right in its left eye. It ran away yowling. He told me that he climbed down the ladder and made a mad dash towards the house. About halfway to the house, there is a large dip in the land, where there are a bunch of bushes and small trees. When he was almost there, he told me that he heard coyote yips all around him, and swore that a whole pack had come upon him. He just ran from it, and while he was on his way up the other side of the dip, he tripped and hurt his leg. He told me he got up and started to limp towards the house. This is the part that gave me chills. He told me that he turned and looked behind him and saw not a coyote anymore, but a person. And it looked like it had a face. he said it started to walk towards him in an odd way. But luckily C and K started yelling at him, and as quickly as it appeared, it disappeared. D told C and K, but they didn't believe him, and they told him it was just a trick of the night. Something that he still tries to believe in. As soon as he told me this, he asked me kindly not to ask him about it anymore, as when he thinks about it, he thinks he sees that coyote outside. D is a very religious and reliable man, so when he says weird stuff is happening, I usually believe him. The coyote he saw that night, me and my cousins have seen before as well, along with the stag. Since the night me and my cousins saw it, I've had 2 more encounters, the latest one being last year.
Here's the story. Basically, I live in Westmoreland County of PA. For a while, there's been strange occurrences around, but recently was the most real and convincing occurrence that there is a cryptid. Basically, my girlfriend vacationed at a place where there was known to be Seneca tribes, so I don't know if she brought something back. Anyways, she's over tonight and I live with another friend, FYI. Anyways, we take our dog out and our motion lights aren't triggered when all of a sudden there's a hiss right next to us and the bushes shake and we rush the dog in as we have no idea what it could be. As this area is prone to raccoons and deer and some coyotes, me and my friend go outside with weapons and flashlights as we have a dog and he is partially blind and has a bad leg, so we can't risk him being attacked. Along with that, there is a guy in our rather wooded community that has a brain issue and tends to wander at night. So with that in mind, we go outside and hear a bird call. Mind you, it's 1 a.m. We hear this bird call non-stop. In my mind, I'm thinking I'm being lured by a skinwalker or the crazy dude, so we go inside. We look at our patio window only to see a deer at our fence line. The deer's back legs look mangled. I kid you not, it actually looks like it's walking with its back legs turned backwards. There is a deer that roams back there that has a broken leg, but only one, and he's always with the family. Anyways, we see this deer, but when it first looks at us with the flashlight, its eyes are green. It puts its head down and stares at us, and we shine the light around and back on it. Its eyes are now red when they go back to green at that point. I'm convinced this is a skinwalker. It turns and is walking around. It isn't listening to me screaming to leave, so I call it a Navajo witch. I don't know why. I didn't know what to get its attention, but I kid you not. It turned its head around and stuck its neck up so freakishly long and stared at me. I actually got spooked. I'm a pretty religious dude who often ghost hunts and goes to creepy abandoned spots, but I kid you not, I kinda heart dropped. So at this point, I go and get my silver cross and shine the flashlight on the cross so it can see the cross shining. And it immediately looks away, and I tell it that if it can't cross the fence line because I don't give it permission, and it knows it can't beat the one that's on the cross, and it straight up walked away and didn't look back. I come back inside. My friend goes to sleep, and I go into my bedroom where my girlfriend is asleep. I lay down next to her, and her eyes are on the back of her head. I wake her up, and it turns out she was having a sleep paralysis episode. and she had 2 other sleep paralysis episodes during the entire time me and my friend were outside. I'm wondering if it's some cryptid who was attacking her mind while distracting us, or by coincidence that I happened to have a raccoon hiss at us, someone do a bird call, we see a mangled red-eyed deer, and my girlfriend all have sleep paralysis within a 2-hour period. I'm asking this as I'm pretty knowledgeable of demons and stuff, but I don't think you word the 2 things off the same way, so I came here. Do help, please. Sorry if grammar is bad. It's 4 a.m. and I'm on a mobile. Edit. The deer essentially looked like it had the posture of a crab, and it did not have the thick thighs in the back like a deer. It has legs that look backwards and mangled. I know it all could be a coincidence, just seems all a little weird. Also, I am aware skinwalkers are Navajo exclusive or whatever, but I don't know what else to call something like that.
Hello watchers and listeners. I hope you enjoyed the video. A huge thank you to Marie LivesTheHorror for joining me on this one. We did another collaboration which is over on her channel, so I suggest you go over there and check it out. The link is in the description below. She is a very talented narrator whose channel I'm sure you'll enjoy. As always, thank you to all the Reddit users who allowed me to use their stories. If you have a story you would like me to read on this channel, please send it to my email, which is in the description below. Thanks again. I truly appreciate you all, and stay safe.